The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame. Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and this week I am joined by my bro host.
Yes, it's me, your brother. It's Shane Kelly.
And this week we're covering Before Your Eyes. Before Your Eyes is okay, we'll have to figure out how to describe
It's pretty
this
unique.
game. It's very, very unique. And it's very up our show's alley, so I'm glad we're taking the chance to cover it.
Yeah, I knew I would like this one based on just some of the initial pitches. It sounded very much like it would be for us. It's a game where you are, and I mean you, the player, every time you physically blink your eyes, the scene is going to be cutting forward. You know, sometimes you might be moving a few minutes or very far into the future, and that is essentially the pitch for the game mechanically, and that is pretty much all that I had going for it when I decided I wanted to play it. And then you quickly discover that this game is taking that idea of like kind of blinking is something that we all do mechanically, you know, on autopilot automatically. You don't notice 90% of the blinks you do. You probably blinked while I spoke this sentence. And so when you are using that to kind of play off of the idea of something you're experiencing that you might, you know, not want to just sort of slip through your fingers, you know, that's the immediate tension of the game. And I think it's great when you can have kind of a mechanical idea that's immediately implies some sort of kind of story tension, and they really pulled this off. I thought they did a really good job.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few areas that I think are worth talking about here, and some of them are going to kind of be locked into spoiler territory. So like this game is from my perspective, this is a huge success, both in terms of merging this really interesting, unique control mechanic, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth about, with its sort of storytelling approach. And those are both things we can talk about mostly without spoiling the details. But it also, I think, does an extremely good job of kind of bringing that together with a thematic thrust that just absolutely works. This is a really, really moving experience, like a really good story, well told in a way that I found extremely moving. And that part will have to stick behind the spoiler break. So trust me on that, in that it is an extremely well done, moving narrative. Also about an hour and a half long, which great.
Yeah.
The thing is that I know we can talk about spoiler free. The big sort of headline thing about this game, the sort of pitch, is that this is a game about your life flashing before your eyes. The sort of initial setup is you are a dead person, you're a lost soul, and your soul is sort of awash on a sea of lost souls, and you've been plucked out of that sea by this sort of soul fisherman, this boatman across. It's not exactly a River Styx scenario, since it seems like it's more of like a wide ocean, but this sort of dog/wolf-like man, very weird image with that character, who is a kind of ferryman taking souls from this vast sea to a kind of final resting place, I guess, that he only explains as the gatekeeper, who's going to potentially, if she thinks your life is interesting and believes your story, will let you through into whatever is beyond this, right? So we know you're already dead, and in order for him to tell your story to the gatekeeper, he needs you to relive your life for him, on fast forward. He's going to you're going to blink your way through your life. Your life is going to flash before your eyes, so that this ferryman guy can observe it and recount your story to the gatekeeper. And he kind of explains this to you all in like one very brief scene. And the sort of life flashing before your eyes thing, what I think isn't clear from the way they position this, like they say like every time you blink, the story will jump forward. That's not exactly the case. That's a little bit of an overstatement. And honestly,
Right.
if they had kind of gone entirely in that direction, I think this would have been almost impossible to play. But what this does is sets up scenes. So you're reliving your life from babyhood through adulthood. And in every scene, something will play out, some moment from your childhood or what have you. And at some point in the scene, and usually earlier than you would want, a metronome, which is thematically important because there's a lot of music vibes going on in this game, but like a metronome appears and begins tick, tick, ticking away. And once the metronome appears and starts ticking, if you blink and your webcam sees you do it, because the webcam, I thought their detection on this worked really well. We can talk about that. But if you blink while the metronome is on screen, then it will instantly advance you forward to the next scene. By the time you've opened your eyes, it will usually have already loaded in the next scene. And their trick here is that a lot of the times it'll be giving you scenes where you'll want to hear more or want to stay in that moment. And you'll be trying not to blink in those moments. Your mother will be telling you something about her life, or you'll be spending a moment with a treasured friend or perhaps more, and you'll want to stay in that moment, and then tick, tick, tick. And if you know that when you blink, which, this made me very, very conscious of how often I blink, you'll know that when you blink, this moment will be gone. And so it leaves you with this constant feeling of like fighting against moments slipping through your fingers in a way that's like more explicit than I think I've ever sort of. That's like a really common vibe, right? In things about like, this was your life, or looking back on your life is like that, all these precious moments are also suddenly lost. But like nothing makes it feel that way by like having to fight not to blink in order to not miss it.
One thing this brought me back to a little bit was we did 30 Flights of Loving for this show. We talk about it a lot in retrospect, I guess because it was very influential. But that was a game that really played with kind of film quick cut edits. And we see a lot more games playing with that now. And this game is playing in the same space, but by adding this kind of very unique kind of triggering mechanism based off of like, something that you have some degree but not complete control over, giving the player like some but not complete control over that kind of quick edit is a very neat way to play with this in terms of just the filmic editing that they managed to pull together here. I also think there's something very stagey or like theatrical about it because there's a visual style here. I have a hard time explaining it, but frequently if you're doing like black box theater, by which I mean like, small stage, this is typically theater in the round. A lot of the times they divide up the stage by putting like a little platform somewhere and dropping a single spotlight on it. And so often you're really kind of zoomed in on a particular spot on the stage, so to speak. They do that a lot in this game where the scene around you is, you're not moving as the viewer, but you can control the camera with your mouse. I think this game would be interesting, by the way, if they were able to do it in VR and have you actually use your ability to look around. I think it would work entirely if it had been done that way. It
would totally work in VR if your VR headset could sense blinking, which like I can't imagine most of them do.
Yeah, which I don't know. I don't believe most can. Yeah, they would have to be pretty specific for that. The kind of spotlight effect. A lot of times the scene that you're in is kind of black or blank, but you are seeing elements of the 3D scene as though you could only see the elements that kind of have this soft-edged spotlight hitting, which I think it's kind of interesting. And they also use that to kind of reveal elements in the scene as you go. I
love that too, because it really sort of fit with this idea of like recalling slightly dim, distant memories, thinking back on like the very first moment or one of the first moments in the game, you are a little baby in a bathtub. By the way, like anxiety memories of Edith Finch. I thought of the game Edith Finch many times as I was playing this. but in that moment, like it feels as if the bathtub is the whole world, right? And then it slowly starts sort of, you're saying it's sort of like a spotlight, and that's absolutely right, but it sort of feels like it's like it just like casts light on and suddenly renders in more elements of the world. Your awareness of the world is expanding. And yeah, it's really, really effectively done. It has this very film-like feel, and 30 Flights is a good touch point there. But it also just sort of like, it lets you do, it does more than just jump cuts with the blinking mechanic. So like, for example, in many situations, there'll be something you need to interact with, and what you do is sort of point the camera at it. It'll show a little eye icon on it, and if you blink while pointing at it, then it'll take some action. Basically anything that you would do in a more adventure gamey style thing with a click, here it does with a blink. But then it'll do some even more unique interactions with the blinking mechanic. The one that stuck out the most to me, what I thought was like really clever, was a little later in the game. There are a number of times when you as a child are trying to listen in on your parents. Your parents are in the other room having an argument or something like that, for example. And you can't quite hear it, but if you close your eyes, then the sort of background audio fades away and you can hear your parents more clearly. And you can like listen in on these conversations that they're having that you're not supposed to hear by kind of like shutting your eyes and trying to listen closely. And that was like an incredible little mechanic. I thought that was like really, really clever. So they made this sort of on the technical level, this game's ability to detect if you are blinking. You have to position your head sort of, within view of your webcam, and you can't be like looking around, obviously. So it's, there's some level of it that like isn't 100% perfect, but like I was so impressed with it from a technical standpoint. It did a very good job of tracking my blinks. And while I was playing the game, as long as I didn't like move my chair too much, it just worked. And it was very immersive.
We can't really spend that long talking about this game in terms of like what it's doing mechanically before we start getting into what it's doing thematically. So yeah. I really only want to share a couple more things about the style of the game, about the visuals, and about the music before we get off of this. The visuals, I think, are like clean and effective. The one thing I will say, I have some critiques of the visuals. The music is beautiful throughout, and is excellent, and is and it's used thematically, and they use good. But anyway, but I had some issues with the visuals of this game. One is just something that's a personal issue for me, and this is something that I see everywhere and I am often irritated by, and that is what I can only refer to as Tumblr nose. And it is in everything now. This is where, in cartooning, often you have a kind of a different color applied to the nose from the rest of the face. And, in things like cartoons, this is done, obviously, because having a little bit of contrast makes something visually distinct. But it is maybe a pet peeve of mine. It makes everyone look like, I don't know, Pinocchio or something to me. And it is an odd style. But done well here. It's done very well. But combined with kind of a low poly style. The thing that really I think is more of a thing I want to kind of bring up is about the mocap performance. I can always spot it when a game uses motion capture, because you'll have movement for your human characters that doesn't match the movement of anything else in the game. In terms of style, animation. This is a game that is very film-like, but really it's more animation-like because they've chosen a really cartoony, stylized look. But then when you take mocap performance and just apply it to these really low-detailed characters, it's something that for me, I think you could convey a lot more, either by having more realistic, more human characters, or by animating them in a more traditional animation way. So you get these characters that are very traditional animation in terms of their style, little red-nosed circle faces, and then you've got the animation that is very, it looks kind of jarring to me, especially when you have things like the character of the wolf guy who has a strangely flat face for a wolf, and then like clips through the floor when he's crawling around trying to howl at the moon. Like it's very obvious that they mocapped this one guy on a stool one time and then just like put it into the scene. All the vocal performances are amazing, but the mocap performances I take an issue with. And then that really stands out to me when you compare it with the animation that they did for the non-human characters, and there are quite a few, like the birds and the cat. There's a moment where you scare the cat by taking a flash photograph of it, and it's perfectly cartoony. Like cat like jumps in the air and like scrambles its feet before running off, and it's stylistically 180 degrees from where they went with the human characters.
What do you think the other characters other than the boatman, the wolf man guy, were mocapped? Because I think he was the only mocapped one. I think the rest of them. You think so?
No, absolutely. They were all mocapped. Yeah.
Really? Okay. Because like he was like
pixels.
really hamming it up. Like I agree that particular performance kind of stood out for me, and not necessarily in a positive way. He was a non-human character. He's like a wolf man, right? And he had this sort of like frenetic energy to his movement that didn't read as like part of the larger piece to me. He is sort of just like this, like what do you call that? Like he's only in 3 scenes basically. He's there to sort of introduce you to the game, and then he's in a very pivotal sort of middle game moment, and then he's in at the very, very end. And
right.
I don't know. It didn't take me out of it exactly because he was sort of just part of a frame story. I don't think the other human characters' performances were as distracting to me, but he was just like this. No, like hammy.
It's because of the way they're directed too.
Yeah, I thought they were all fine.
He's very hammy, and that does make it stand out there.
Yeah, but like again, you're right. Like the vocal performances were amazing. Like the mom and dad performances were
Excellent.
Like top notch. Like voice acting performances for a video game, like really emotional. I just thought it was like performance wise, at least from that aspect, was really excellent. Like, and that, that's so important because this game really hinges on emotional beats, and like, you really care about all of these characters. At least I did. I thought all of them were like really, really well defined, interesting, relatable characters that I deeply cared about by the end of this story. So, really well done there.
I would compare it in that way to the game we recently covered, Adios.
We have not covered Adios. You played Adios, and we haven't done an episode on it yet. I would like to.
Oh, I forgot. We never actually got to talk about Adios. Well, we should talk about Adios, but I'll just say Adios is not as good a game as this, but they are similarly trying to kind of have a brief interactive experience that in many ways is a lot like a play. So, let's talk about Adios later.
Yeah, I'd love to, actually, now that you mention it. So I do think we need, before we start getting into actual spoiler territory, we haven't really gone into the initial setup of the story too deeply yet. And I think it helps to kind of explain before we dive into talking about any early game story beats that we think we might be able to actually talk about spoiler free, to kind of set up the structure. Uh-huh. I don't think this is a spoiler to kind of explain that like the game is divided into 2 halves. There's a sort of a mid-game turn, and we weren't going to talk about anything after that sort of mid-game turn moment pre-spoiler break.
I don't know about this. I think we should say right now, just give our recommendations on the game, because I think this is a game that benefits extremely from going in without an understanding of like what the content of the story is entirely, apart from what we said.
Yeah,
I think this is a point where
right.
I would say if you're intrigued by this game, like you should just go in blind. If you have the ability to play it. So let's just tell people where can they find the game.
Yeah, and I have a couple other things maybe to share at that point too. Yeah, so it is on Steam and the Epic Game Store. I believe it was $10 on both stores, and it's I believe it's Windows only at this point. I would not hold your breath on this reaching any other platforms, because first of all, it probably won't come out to any consoles, because most consoles you can't rely on people having a camera of any kind. And the few that do, like, if you happen to luck into some people with PlayStation 4s who have the like PSI hooked up, which like no one does, it's too low resolution for this thing to do its magic with the webcam. So
we don't know that for sure.
Well, probably not. Like I would bet. So I think
I do think you're probably right. Like this is going to be a game for PC. I'd like to see it come to other.
I think
to like maybe Mac or something.
Yeah, like it would be nice to see a Mac port. At best, you could potentially hope for a mobile port, but I think that would like the fact that like if you're doing this on something like a mobile device, although those all have webcams, they all have 720p webcams, and you can generally expect the camera to be shaking around when someone is holding a device. So I think there's the odds that the tech for the blink detection here would work well on anything other than a PC with a webcam pointed at your face that stays relatively still are very low. So this is going to be a game that, like, if you want to play this, and I strongly recommend playing this, you'll need to seek out a Windows PC with a webcam in order to do it. I had to go steal my webcam back from my wife, who had it set up for her work from home setup, because I don't typically have a webcam connected to my gaming PC. So, whole thing going on there. But yeah, 100% worth picking this game up. And also, I did want to just quickly note a couple of things about the history of this game. I thought it was kind of interesting that this game has gone through a few name changes and everything during its development. This game was on Kickstarter in the form of a game called Close Your way back in, I don't have the date in front of me. I think it was 2016. So it's had a long development cycle. It started as a student project that was basically a proof of concept for the idea. And the original game, Close Your, Live Life One Blink at a Time, is incredibly different in content. It feels like they figured out this mechanic, and it took them a very long time to figure out what story they actually wanted to tell with it. And they really nailed it. They really landed on a story that fits well with the experience. And, as of last year, this game sort of emerged from Kickstarter, ghost territory, and reemerged with the title Coda, which I think is also a very good title. But they found out that a game, or a movie rather, launched at Sundance right when they announced their title that was also called Coda, and so they had to change their title yet again. And so here it is, titled Before Your Eyes, which I think is actually a really good name for this experience. It kind of reminds, it kind of pitches at what the big strength of this game is, the eye blinking mechanic, and also this idea of life flashing before your eyes. So yeah, I think it's a really well executed game, and I'm really glad that these devs kind of carried this idea through. One other thing that I think is kind of interesting and notable, there's been a little bit of, I wouldn't say controversy, but kerfuffle around this game, in that there was a kind of there was a Twitter thing about how this is a game that is an hour and a half long, and the deadline for refunding a game on Steam is 2 hours. So this is a game that literally everyone who sits down to play it will probably be able to complete it 100% and then refund it if they want. And obviously this is not very pleasing to the developer. And there were a couple of examples of people tweeting that they had done just that. And the developer, obviously saw this on Twitter, and there was a whole thread about it from him and everything. And the main person that I saw who had said that they did this sort of apologized and said they were, taking advantage of a broken system, etc. I thought it was very funny that this developer, one of the things he did in response to this was created a game that he has just submitted to Steam called Refund This Game, a game that just displays a 2-hour countdown. And if you get that countdown within 5 seconds of the end of your 2-hour window, you get an achievement. And that's it. And I think the game costs $100. So he has, I think, a very valid concern about the refund policy on Steam, and this is exactly the kind of game that I think will really I don't know how much refunding actually happens on things like this, but it certainly doesn't feel good to see people on Twitter saying that they played this game, that they loved it, that it was moving to them, and then they got their money back. That sucks.
Yeah, it's only $10.
I know.
Come on. All right. $10 is different to a lot of different people. And I know there's probably some people listening to whom like $10, might be the difference between having, a nice lunch and not, or something like that. But yeah, it's when I see people online who are just saying like, okay, this is something that you can get for free. Well, if the artist doesn't want to give you their work for free, I don't know.
At that point, if that's really where you're at with this,
whatever.
Just watch a Let's Play on YouTube. Don't abuse the Steam refund policy.
You'll be good.
Yeah. So we are about to dive into discussing the story in more detail, and especially talking about the themes that this game addresses. And so this is going to be spoiler territory. So I'll go ahead and do our outro now. We're going to do our spoiler break. First of all, thank you for listening to The Short Game. And if you want to find our show on the web, you can find it at www.theshortgame.net. You can find our contact form there to let us know what you think or to suggest games for the show. That's a great way to get in touch with us with a longer message. You can find us on Twitter at _shortgame. Best way to get in touch with us is to become one of our patrons. If you go to patreon.com/theshortgame, then that gives you instant access to, obviously you can message us through Patreon if that's what you want to do, but that also instantly gives you access to our Discord, which is where we talk about the show. We plan episodes there. We talk amongst ourselves about all kinds of stuff. Today we were chit-chatting about baseball and games that we're planning to cover. So if you want to join us there, we would love to have you. And we have some new patrons. Thank you very much to our new patrons. We'd also very much love it if you would take the time to review the show on your podcast app of choice. I'll just put this out there. We haven't had a new iTunes review in months, and that is a bit of a bummer. We would love to have those if you have a minute, or even if you just want to go in and update them. That helps.
Yeah, those matter.
Yeah, they really do, and they help people find the show. I know that iTunes, or the podcast app from Apple, has just gone through some kind of major renovation, and so where you find that now, I don't know. But also, if you do, it's probably, they're probably tweaking their algorithm right now, and it definitely helps us out when people review the show and or even just go in and leave us a rating. So we like to think we are a 5-star podcast, and we hope you agree. If you and okay, before we get into spoiler break, I'm Raygan Kelly. You can find me on Twitter at Raygan K. Shane, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is your spoiler break. Wow, this one made me cry. Like, more than I was expecting. Like, quite a bit more. Boy. Okay, so you said we don't want to go beat by beat, and I agree, but I do think I want to set up the kind of the thing that really the turn in this game that really changed what this game was to me. The beginning of the game. Yeah. You believe you're playing a game about a young artist, right? And I'm immediately gonna identify, right? This kid was trying to go to an artsy school. Shane, you and I both went to artsy school. We were theater kids, not anything as interesting as a good pianist or anything. But I was immediately identifying with this kid who was being propelled forward into a life in the arts by a parent who was, I wouldn't exactly say failed, but sort of, didn't achieve her ambitions as a composer.
Yeah. Specifically, she was, she didn't feel like she had lived up to her own father's expectations of her. And I think that's important.
Oh yeah.
To the story. Yeah. Her motivation in music was based on her father's, so she basically, the main character, who is named Ben Brynn, comes from kind of a line of musicians who have not lived up to their parents' expectation.
Yeah, and the mother had this whole monologue about how her father told her that the only way to live on after you are dead is to create a great work of art that will be remembered after you die, right? And then and then he said he never had, and then the mother, his daughter, had said, well, what about me? And he said, of course, well, maybe if you create a great work of art, then I can live on through you. And so she was trying to shoulder that burden for him, and more or less failed, although she had created some great music. And that kind of burden passes on to you, poor Benjamin Brynn. And that theme kind of carries through the whole thing. The story kind of trips through his like young life, meeting a girl. So I think there's a number of choices you can make throughout this portion of the game.
Yeah. You told me some of the choices you made. So I tried making pretty opposite choices. I don't think the choices are terribly impactful in this game. They do change the results of some of the scenes. So I guess we can just talk through it, and if we find places where things were quite different, we can bring it up. I think that tends to be the case in games like this, because imagine doing a hugely branching narrative with this level of like production and voice and mocap.
Yeah,
it would be quite an undertaking.
Yeah, and also once we get down towards the end, there's a feeling that it wouldn't matter really anyway. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, that's very true. So Ben's life trajectory is basically based on his mother's expectations of him. And there's kind of two main characters at the very start of the game, and we add a few members to the cast, but the kind of enduring most important characters are his mother and father. And his mother has very high expectations of him musically, as we brought up. She was very ambitious in her music. Like, she wanted to, display, create a work of great genius. And then the father is presented as kind of the kind of a lovable goof character who kind of in many ways embodies the wife's failure to meet those ambitions. I think she's more of a central character than he is, but he is the and the little small seaside town that she lives in with him. This is the life she has ended up without the success that she sought. I think her kind of resentment of that is shown through the character of the cat, which she is allergic to, but the dad brings into the family kind of unasked, and then the cat symbolically, I think, becomes quite important to the story.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of cat motifs. We can come to some of those later, but of course, the game begins with you're talking to this. I think I thought of him as a wolf man, but he is sort of ambiguously feline as well. So like even that. Oh, and I mean, another thing that I noticed immediately was like that scene when you are playing, you're a baby and you're playing with your little toy boat that comes up as a visual element throughout the game. And that is the boat that, or is in a sense the boat that you're riding on with this like, deathly boatman. So, there's a lot
it has a clockwork key that winds it. So you're on a giant clockwork toy boat. It's clearly a toy boat from the beginning.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes up there, and from the very first scene thematically, is the kind of giant agave plant. Not agave, is that right?
Maybe the sort of
what sort of plant is that?
The one that's like or is it an aloe plant?
Yeah.
Or I don't know.
Yeah, it's like an aloe or an agave, a large. But this is the sort of kind of desert succulent that lives for 10 years and then puts up a beautiful tree-like flower and then dies. I had one of these in my neighborhood, and I always admired my neighbor's gigantic cactus on his lawn. And then one day it put up a towering shoot that went. This is a one-story house. It was fully twice the height of the house, and had to be roped to the house with some bungee cords to keep it from falling over into the street.
Oh my God.
And then, by the time that thing had put down this enormous mast, the whole thing was gone because it died. So I think that's also thematically that comes up a few times in the story, just sort of representing kind of the beauty of something that's impermanent. Yeah,
that's a good point. And honestly, I didn't really follow that sort of theme thread, so maybe bring that back up when it comes to it, because I think that's a good point. And I wasn't thinking so much about that part. The interesting thing about this section of the game is that it sort of moves you, I'd say, relatively quickly through these beats of his life. You get a bunch of choices about his artistic trajectory. Is he going to spend time connecting with the neighbor girl that he likes? Or is he going to spend time preparing for the big audition? when the audition.
Well, that's the main quote unquote choice that you get, right? Did you study for the music school entry?
Oh no, I went out and spent all night with the girl, of course.
All right, so how was that?
It's a nice moment. It's not exactly like a thunderclap of romance or anything. These are two children, but they go out and spend time on a beach, and look up at the stars. And there's a sort of moment where you're like connecting stars together into a constellation. And of course, as all of the scenes in this, it ends far too quickly. And this was one of the major places in the game where like I had so sometimes in this game, like I was able to like really restrain my blinks. We didn't really talk about that, but like I wear contact lenses. Before playing this game, I went and I took out my contact lenses. I applied saline solution cleaner to them. I put them back in. I made sure my eyes were nice and wet. And I sat down feeling like I was like fully lubricated. I was like, I can not blink if I want. Right. And there were definitely stretches in this game.
This is not a game where you're having a staring contest. This is honestly, you do not have to do that.
No.
Like if you cannot stop yourself from blinking, there are going to be one or two things that maybe you don't see some small piece of dialogue, but I don't think that's how this game is really built. Also, remember, there's the metronome.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever really miss anything important.
I know that I did miss one thing. Either I missed something or something kind of came out of sequence, because I know there was a detail at some point where the Wolfman was telling my story and he mentioned something that I definitely could not remember. But it may also just have been, I don't know, like a glitch in the flags in the story. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Let's kind of stick on the topic of the life and times of Ben Brynn. So for my Ben Brynn, in his telling of his life, he stayed home and practiced piano. Because if I'm in a video game and it's clearly about my relationship with my mother, I'm going to try and do the things my mother tells me to do because I am a good boy. And so, yeah, stayed home, went to the audition for the music school, did really well in the audition at the music school, still didn't get accepted to the music school.
Oh, bummer.
Disappointment. The disappointment in your mother's voice was sincere. But, she said it was clear you had tried your hardest. And then pretty much after that, he gets very sick. He says he stays sick and has to stay inside for a year, which is a lot. And then during that time, he becomes a visual artist. He really starts to draw, and you get a lot of practice as he draws and paints, which they use the mechanics kind of well for that. There's a sort of like lift and place drawing mechanic that I think is kind of cute. And then Ben goes on to have to an art school where he's accepted to an excellent art school. And you meet this very silly art teacher who I thought was the worst character in the game because he just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, that wasn't great.
And then you have a moment where, you get to choose, do I sell out or do I not sell out? Which this is presented as selling out, but he's basically getting an agent, which is actually the opposite of selling out. That is taking your artwork very seriously.
Okay, I have to cut in here for a second to say, like, both of these moments, at the time, I had the feeling like, man, this kind of feels like a person who hasn't gone to art school and hasn't been a professional artist writing about what they kind of think it would be like to go to art school and or be a professional artist. And I was like, man, that kind of, what the heck, man? And then there's a 100% plot justification for that I was like, oh.
Yeah.
We'll get to that.
So, but we're there. We're at that turn because
right.
By the end, for my version of Ben, he had rejected selling out and he'd become a big name artist. And then his mother had passed away and he did a series of paintings inspired by her music, and he was a world famous artist. She was remembered through him, and he had achieved his ends. And at the end of that story, neighbor girl Chloe is back and is like, "Hey, you remember me? Maybe you want to get a drink sometime." And that was the end of the life story of Ben.
Yeah. Okay. So this was, and then of course, like it cuts back to the boat, and the ferryman has figured out that you're lying to him, and he explains to you some kind of a creepy detail, which is that like the most important thing when you're going to talk to this gatekeeper to move on as your soul is not to lie. And the creepy birds, the sort of seabirds that have been hanging out on your boat, those are liar birds. Those are people who have lied to the gatekeeper and have been turned irreversibly into horrible birds. And that's what'll happen to you if you lie. And my thought was like, I'm just playing this game, dog. I didn't like choose to lie to you. What are you talking about? But that's where it starts getting into the real, like, deep, the true story here that was, like, I thought extremely moving. So I'll kind of like spoil it now, and then Shane, you and I can talk about the themes here. And that is basically that Benjamin Brynn was a child who, it mentioned his illness, but it sort of was like a brief moment in his original version of his story. Yeah. Well, Benjamin Brynn is a child that died at, I think, 12 years old of an unspecified illness. But if I had to guess, it was some sort of cancer. And the lie of like, here's my life that, that I imagine. This is the life that he imagined for himself. And in fact, a life that he wrote down. He, at some point while he was sick, he got a typewriter and he sat down and wrote the story of his life that he imagined it would be, if he got to live on. This was at a time when it's pretty clear to everybody, although they're not talking about it, that he's pretty sick. And so he writes this sort of like speculative biography of himself. And that's the story that you've been telling this boatman. But the true story for Benjamin Brynn was that he was a 12-year-old who didn't get to live the kind of life that he wanted to live. He didn't get to, and I think he's deeply troubled by the fact that he didn't get to do what his, this whole theme with his mother about like, feeling like you need to create a great work in order to be remembered or for your life to have meaning, right? He didn't get to do that. He died too soon.
So the way that it man, this one's a hard one to talk about because, I mean, what the story does very adeptly is, it kind of has this, kind of dance around this sort of central point of like, what is the meaning of life? Which, I mean, that's a lot for a video game to try and take on in like an hour and a half. But the thing is that there's a scene at the end where, I mean, I'm just going to go to the very final scene, which is, so Ben's mother has read his story, and he had overheard his story as he was reading it to Chloe, who it's kind of revealed she'd also lost her mother, and so she's like no stranger to death, and so she has come to kind of be with him, and they talk through the story, but then the mother, overhearing it, like can't confront her son, and then time passes, and she brings to him kind of her version of the story written out. And in that version, she just sort of is essentially telling him everything that he means to her. And it was so beautiful.
That was the most moving scene. I was bawling.
Yeah. And it concludes, she says to him, he was everything he needed to be just as he was, which echoes back to what she had kind of wished her father had said to her. And I think it's worth mentioning again that, like, as you're going back and revisiting his life in the kind of more truthful way, there are many moments that were glossed over, things that clearly Ben hadn't wanted to recollect on or reflect on, while he was alive or while he was looking at it the first time with the boatman. And those were scenes where those are the only times in even the first playthrough where you're really kind of challenged not to blink. You know that a scene is going to advance because you'll see a metronome, and if you see a metronome on the screen, it means like, hey, you're going to blink and move past this. And there are several scenes where it's like, okay, you're looking at a telephone at the end of a long hallway, and you're slowly creeping towards it, and the whole time the metronome is going. And when you're returning to the kind of scene, it's things that are of kind of buried meaning to him. So, for example, his first encounter with death is the death of these kittens. That's grisly, and they're like literally torn apart by wolves, and he doesn't want to remember it. And his second encounter with death is the death of his grandfather, and the fact that his mother isn't able to kind of fulfill the things that she wanted to show to him. And then kind of here at the end to finally have this scene where every time you blink, like you're blinking throughout this scene because literally your eyes are filling with tears.
Yeah.
But because it's that sad. But as you're blinking, it's his story being told to the boatman, by the boatman to the gatekeeper, who is the cat. Which, by the way, I thought it was so beautiful that the cat comes back. You know, the cat has had that loss as well. The cat has lost its children and then disappeared. You know, they thought the cat and the children must have been eaten by the wolves or coyotes or whatever it is. And now the cat has come back. And so the mother is sitting there. The cat is sitting there, scruffy and torn up. And then every time you blink, it's alternating back and forth to this this kind of fantasy of the gatekeeper and the story being told by the boatman, and the story from the mom is the same. And you're just sort of quick cutting back and forth every time you kind of, you know, blot at your tears. That was the end. The mother tells the son that, you know, his life has been perfect and has meaning to her, and, you know, hopefully Ben believes that and finds peace as he moves on. And that's the end of the story. Which it's absolutely devastated.
It really did. Me too.
Oh, one more thing. The agave, the cactuses, as you're approaching, every time you blink while you're on the boat, that's the trees all around you are these enormous cactuses that are constantly putting up their like tree-like shoots and then vanishing.
Oh, that was such an effective moment. That was so cool. And like, that's the only time when you can just like blink as much as you like in this game, and something does reflect, you know, something changes every time you blink. You know, it was really cool. Like this feeling that like you're in this otherworldly space where like, you know, time and death are meaningless. And as you blink, every time you blink, you're seeing these trees grow from little saplings to like gigantic agave towers and then fade away. And then, you know, and then you come up on that gigantic cat, the gatekeeper, and it is very, it's cool. And yeah, that whole ending sequence was just incredibly moving. You know, blinking back and forth between this, you know, the monologue that the ferryman is telling to the gatekeeper, and it's the same thing that your mother is telling to you at the last moments of your life. I have never played, so I don't love like cancer and death stories. You know, I don't want to get too personal on this show, but like I'll say that, like, you know, Shane and I, you know, our mother died of cancer when we were teenagers, and like I've just for years in my life, I just sort of always sort of tap out when that's a big theme, you know, on things. It's just something where like I don't need somebody else's perspective on that.
I didn't know that was what this was going to be.
Me neither.
Actually,
I'm kind of glad I didn't
have picked it if that was the case. So there's a reason that this podcast has not covered, even though we were very plugged into the indie game scene in like 2016, we did not cover That Dragon Cancer, which was like,
yeah,
you know, so this is something that I think, you know, intentionally or just by the fact that we're doing this for fun and not to plumb the depths of our souls. You know, this is not a theme that I think you'll see us address on this show very often, but I am happy that we played this game. and I found it really moving and personal.
Yeah, very much so. And more affecting than I expected.
Yes, especially now that I'm a parent and I'm seeing the. Yeah. By the way, I hear that Dragon Cancer is a really great game.
Yeah, I hear it's good too. I don't know. Maybe this game has taught me that maybe I'm emotionally and psychologically in a place where I can engage in media that plumbs these depths more. I know that when I was a teenager, through my 20s and so on, every time I saw a movie that was like about this, it's not even that like I lost my shit. It's just that I felt like I was being emotionally manipulated, you know? Like I felt like I was like something about me was being used to create a reaction in me that I didn't like. I didn't like the feeling, and I didn't like feeling like I was being made to have the feeling. You know what I mean? Hate that. And
I'm personally just not going to have a conversation on a podcast in which I talk about this, because it's just not something that I want to share with strangers on the internet. I love you all. I appreciate you, but it's private.
I get that too. I get that too. So like, leaving it there, I will just say that this worked for me in a way that media about these themes rarely does. And I found it very moving and affecting. And I 100% recommend playing this game, regardless of your relationship with parenting or cancer or childhood illness or what have you. Like, I do think it maybe would have been nice to have a heads up about the content, but I still feel very positive about the experience I had playing this game.
At least that Dragon Cancer put it in the title.
That's true. And so that's Before Your Eyes, and we mentioned it in the pre-spoiler wrap-up, but this is on Epic and Steam, and it takes about an hour and a half, and it is definitely worth spending the hour and a half. Make sure you've got a working webcam, and try not to blink too much.
Bring the tissues.
Yeah, totally. Wow, it was quite something. So thanks very much. We already did our admin before the spoiler break, so we'll let you go. Thanks very much for listening to the short game.
Thank you. Yeah, for real. Thank you.